The bakery reminded Violet of Cook's kitchen. Heat ribboned out from the oven doors, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh bread and spices. The baker showed Violet a stack of empty flour bags where she was to sleep, and bowls where her food was kept. All day long, a bell above the door chimed as people came and went. Violet curled around the customers' legs as they peered into the display cases. She knew the custard tarts were delicious. She'd sampled a bit of the custard when the baker wasn't looking. But when she meowed to let the customers know, no one paid her much attention. When Violet tried to help the baker knead the bread dough, she was shooed off the countertop. "Not now, Violet," the baker said. "I've got my job to do and you've got yours." That night, after the ovens had cooled and Violet was asleep on her flour sacks, a familiar scritch scritch awoke her. Sure enough, a mouse darted from beneath the oven. Violet crept toward the bread case. Remember rule number 1, prowl silently. Rule number 2, what was it again? Plan something, but plan what? As her feet touched the countertop, Violet began to slide. Bam, bam, went a stack of baking sheets. Thump, 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 went a dozen loaves of bread. Kapoof, went a bag of flour. The mouse was long gone. Disappointed in herself, Violet settled back on top of her flour sacks. Plan your leap carefully. Now she remembered. The next morning, the baker looked at the flour-covered kitchen. "Oh no," she said. "I'm afraid this won't do. I need a catch to catch mice, not turn my bakery upside down." And so the baker tucked Violet under her arm like a little loaf of white bread and walked back to the house on the hill. "I remembered rule number 1, Violet told her mother, "but I forgot rule number 2. Why can't I figure out what God has planned for me?" "Be patient," said Violet's mother. "It's hard to recognize His plan while we're in the midst of it." Later that day, a lady came to look into the crate. She had clean hands, unlike the gardener, and instead of a starchy white hat like the baker, she wore her hair loose. Around her neck were strings of colorful beads that shimmered in the sunlight. "Aren't you a lovely one?" the lady said as she stroked Violet's back. Violet felt a purr begin to rumble in her throat. "Violet's an extra fine cat, Miss Alice," said Cook. "In that case, I promise to take extra good care of her." "I don't know this one," Violet's mother meowed, "but have faith." Alice carried Violet down the hill to a building with gold lettering across the window. Inside, the air smelled of paper and beeswax and tea. Brightly colored books lined shelves along the walls. Alice pointed out sections for history, art, cooking, literature, gardening, and poetry. There were even books for children, and all of the books in the shop Violet thought they were the most beautiful. Later, Alice showed Violet a fluffy cushion where she was to sleep and mismatched set of bowls where her food would be kept. Alice smoothed the fur on Violet's head and scratched her gently behind her ears. Just then a bell rang. "That would be a customer," said Alice. "Let's give her a warm welcome, shall we?" All day long, the bell above the door tinkled as people came and went. Violet followed the customers as they moved through the maze of shelves. She studied the books backward and forward and upside down. And after each customer paid, Violet worked hard to pull the receipt tape from the register. "Thank you, Violet," Alice always said. "What would I do without such a helpful cat?" It was a busy, happy day, and yet Violet couldn't help but worry. She knew Alice would eventually want her to catch mice, just as the gardener and the baker had done. That night, as Violet was settling down to sleep, she saw something move along the floor. "It's just a stray book receipt," she told herself. But when the something turned and moved the other way, Violet sat up. It was no receipt. And hadn't Mother said that mice even ate books? The rules! What was she supposed to do? Prowl silently, Violet crept forward as quietly as a moonbeam through a window. Plan your leap carefully. Violet tensed herself like an arrow about to be shot from a bow. What came next? Yes, pounce boldly. Violet closed her eyes and pounced. When she opened them again, she was amazed to see a tail beneath her paw, and connected to the tail was a mouse. She had caught a mouse at last. It was small and gray with twinkling eyes and a pink nose that quivered with fear. This tiny thing was the enemy? Suddenly the light went on. "Violet!" exclaimed Alice. "What are you doing?" Violet blinked. She knew Alice expected her to finish off the mouse. After all, it was her job. Violet felt a terrible sadness because she knew what she had to do, and with that she lifted her paw and let the mouse go. "Come here, Violet," said Alice. Violet took one last look around the bookshop. Of all the places she had been, she liked this one best. "I'm so glad you let that little mouse go," Alice said. Violet jumped onto Alice's lap and looked at her curiously. Wasn't Alice going to send her away? Hadn't she failed once again as a mouse catcher? Alice held her close. "Mice are nuisances, but they're God's creatures too. We'll find other ways of keeping them out." The next day, Violet helped Alice find all the holes in the floorboards and baseboards where a mouse might sneak in. Then they plugged the holes with rags. "What would I do without such a helpful cat?" said Alice. "I'm so glad you've come to stay." Violet purred with contentment. Her mother was right. God had a plan for her all along, and it suited Violet just fine. The end.